On the eastern edge of Wyoming, where the Shoshone National Forest rolls into vast valleys, a black bear named Luna began preparing for the most fragile season of her life. She had denned here before. Her scent trails crisscrossed the pines. Her claw marks carved into aspen trunks. Rangers had tracked her movements for years, noting her steady rhythm. Fatten up through summer, settle into solitude by late fall, and vanish beneath snow-draped slopes. This time, though, something felt different. Black bears live in one of the harshest environments of the American wilderness. They gorge through late summer and autumn, not because they are greedy, but because survival in winter demands it. For a female, survival is even trickier. She doesn't just sleep, she carries life inside her. Bears have what biologists call delayed implantation. That means when Luna mated earlier in the year, the fertilized egg did not grow right away. It floated, waiting while Luna's body made a calculation. Did she eat enough? Could she endure the long freeze? Only when she had stored the right amount of fat did the pregnancy continue. If she failed to reach that threshold, the egg would simply never implant. It's nature's way of balancing hope with harsh reality. By early January, Luna's body had made its choice. Her pregnancy advanced. To the rangers, it was no surprise. She had moved more heavily that fall, almost waddling under her dark fur. They nicknamed her the matron of the valley. They knew that if all went well, she would not wake alone when the mountain thawed. She would bring forth the next generation of Wyoming's forest animals, adding to the long lineage of black bears that had wandered here since before the land was named. What made Luna special was not just biology, it was her story. Years earlier, as a young cub, she had been spotted near a backcountry road, thin and trembling, her mother nowhere in sight. A wildlife staff member named Ethan had been among the first to track her. He remembered the way she hissed and swatted, even as a tiny cub, as if declaring, "I will not give in." Instead of capturing her, they monitored her from a distance, letting her wild instincts remain intact. Against the odds, she made it. She grew into a strong, solitary, female, uncollared, untagged wild in every sense. Now, Ethan often told new rangers, Luna is proof that sometimes the best rescue is leaving nature alone. It was a lesson worth remembering in a world where people often want to intervene too quickly. Luna's independence, born from hardship, was what made her fit to raise cubs in the unforgiving Wyoming winter. Black bears may not have the size of a grizzly or the icy mystique of a polar bear, but they hold something else: adaptability. They live across North America, from Maine's dense woods to Alaska's rugged coastlines. In Wyoming, they thrive in mixed forests, slipping between fir stands and berry thickets. They are omnivores, nibbling on roots, berries, insects, and carrion, whatever the land offers. To locals, seeing a black bear is both ordinary and magical. Ordinary because they belong here, magical because each sighting is a reminder that wildness still pulses through the Rockies. For Luna, the forest was both pantry and shelter. She foraged with methodical patience, rolling over logs to uncover beetles, climbing into choked cherry branches for sweet bursts of fruit, and stripping away bark to taste sap. Each act added ounces to her frame. Each step brought her closer to the quiet darkness of her den. Bears don't build elaborate nests. Luna scratched out a hollow beneath a fallen pine, lined it with leaves and bits of fur pulled from her own belly. This simple den would be her maternity ward, her nursery, her shield from wind and predators. Rangers noted her choice with quiet respect. Some dens collapse in avalanches, others flood in sudden thaws. But Luna's hollow was tucked into a ridge that caught sunlight in spring, yet stayed shaded through the coldest weeks. She seemed to know the land's secrets. Bears have been described as lumbering, clumsy creatures, but in truth they are precise. Every step, every scratch is calculated to give life the best chance. What is remarkable about black bears is not just their strength, it's their stillness. Imagine carrying unborn cubs, your heartbeat slowing, your body surviving months without food, your muscles resisting atrophy. That is Luna's reality. While humans bustle and fret, she surrenders to silence, conserving energy so that tiny lives inside her can grow. She will not eat, drink, or defecate until spring. Yet her body will transform fat into milk rich enough to launch new life into the world. It's a biological miracle that often goes unseen because it unfolds in hidden dens under snow away from human eyes. This is where mystery enters the story. Rangers could only guess what was happening under that ridge. They checked tracks in the snow, sniffed the air for the faint musk of bear fur, and listened at a cautious distance. No one dared disturb her. For months, they waited, marking her den on maps, whispering her name like a prayer. Luna's den, still quiet. There is a lesson here, one that Ethan often shared with visitors. Patience is part of conservation. In a world used to instant updates, sometimes the greatest gift we can give wild animals is to let their stories unfold without interruption. Every day they resisted the urge to peek into Luna's den was a vote for her freedom, her dignity. As winter deepened, storms buried the forest. Branches snapped under ice, rivers slowed to trickles. Wolves howled in the distance, elk pressed together for warmth, and high on the ridges Luna slept on. Inside her, a transformation was stirring. The cubs, no larger than chipmunks at first, were developing, nudged along by the warmth of her body. They would be born while she remained in hibernation, tiny blind creatures searching instinctively for milk. The staff knew this. What they didn't know was how many or how strong. Black bear litters usually number 2. Sometimes 3, occasionally only 1, rarely more. Each cub's chance of survival depends on the mother's health and her ability to ration energy. In captivity, survival odds are higher. In the wild, harsh conditions can tip the scales quickly. That's why every winter birth is a gamble. Ethan recalled a case from years ago where a mother in Montana gave birth to 3 cubs, but only 1 survived the season. It broke my heart, he confessed, but it reminded me that wilderness doesn't measure success the way we do. One life saved is still a victory. These stories haunted him as he monitored Luna's den. Would she emerge alone, or would tiny paw prints follow? To the untrained eye, a black bear's pregnancy might seem unremarkable. To those who follow closely, it is a fragile miracle of timing, biology, and willpower. Luna had already proven once as an abandoned cub that she could fight against the odds. The question was, could she now guide her own offspring into life with the same tenacity? From time to time, hikers asked rangers why the staff cared so much about one bear when hundreds roamed Wyoming. The answer was always the same: because each story matters. Conservation is not only about numbers, it is about connection. When people hear Luna's name, they see more than a shadow crossing the trail. They see resilience, memory, and possibility. They are reminded that behind every set of paw prints is a life worth protecting. By late February, the snow softened around Luna's ridge. Tracks of martens and foxes crisscrossed near her den. A raven perched above, cawing into the stillness. Rangers tightened their patrols, knowing the time was near. Some even camped nearby, keeping their distance, yet refusing to let her story slip past unnoticed. One morning, Ethan scribbled in his notebook, "Silence feels heavier now. Either she has given birth or she is about to." He closed the book, staring at the tree line, wondering which fate awaited Luna. That suspense, the quiet before the cry, is what drew everyone close, and it is what leads us to the next chapter. Because when Luna finally broke that silence, when the forest first echoed with the tiny sound of her newborn, what happened inside that den would ripple far beyond Wyoming's ridges. It would shock the staff and challenge everything they thought they knew about black bears. The forest had gone still when Luna's labor began. Snow muffled every sound, but from the den came a rhythm, soft shuffling, a low groan. The scrape of claws against earth. Black bear births usually move swiftly, yet hour after hour passed, and Luna remained restless. For wildlife staff watching from a distance, the stillness of the forest carried weight. They knew something inside was unfolding, something that could end in life or loss. In most black bear pregnancies, labor is a brief ordeal. A female wakes enough to push, gives birth, and soon the cubs are nursing. But Luna's body resisted the pattern. Her movements were fitful, punctuated by long silences. She shifted constantly, curling, stretching, then pressing her nose into her belly. To a ranger like Ethan who had tracked black bears for decades, this looked unusual. He whispered to a younger staffer, "She's fighting harder than most. Why would labor drag on?" The answer rests in the biology of large mammals. Black bear cubs are born tiny, barely half a pound, because their mother's body conserves energy during hibernation. Still, every birth demands strength from a female who has not eaten or drunk in months. If her fat stores are thin or her den colder than expected, contractions can take longer, the struggle more draining. Luna had prepared well, but her heavy pacing in autumn now made sense. She had been carrying more weight than her watchers realized. The night deepened. A blizzard moved over the ridges and the den disappeared beneath swirling snow. Rangers could no longer see, but they stayed near, huddled in a tent listening. They knew intervention was not possible. Bears are not like domestic animals. There is no midwife's hand to guide a cub. Nature insists on solitude. The staff's role was only to witness to record what happened and to accept the outcome. Ethan told a story to ease the tension. Years before in Montana, another black bear had labored for nearly 14 hours. When she finally gave birth, she delivered 2 cubs, one strong, one stillborn. The lesson was clear. A long labor could mean exhaustion, and exhaustion often tipped the odds against the weakest cub. The younger rangers listened quietly, glancing at the snow-buried den. They hoped Luna's fate would be different. There is mystery in this part of a bear's life. No camera can truly capture it. No instrument can measure it in real time. What happens in the den is hidden. Humans are left to imagine the scene, a mother groaning in the dark, her body straining while the cub inside struggles toward the world. Some staff scribbled in notebooks. Others prayed under their breath. The silence that followed each groan felt unbearable, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. From a biological perspective, the risks were real. If contractions stalled too long, the cub might suffocate. If Luna weakened, she could fail to clean her newborn or warm it quickly enough. Black bear cubs cannot survive without immediate contact. They are born blind, nearly hairless, and unable to regulate their temperature. Within minutes, they must find their mother's milk, or they perish. That urgency haunted the staff as they sat in the snow. But labor is not only biology, it is also a story. For Luna, this was a continuation of the independence she had earned as a cub. She had once been left alone, forced to survive without her mother. Now she faced the same threshold, but in reverse, she was the mother, and the survival of her cubs depended on her will. To Ethan, this symmetry felt almost like fate. He murmured, "She's rewriting her past tonight." The lesson here is simple, though hard for many to accept. Patience often matters more than power. The staff could not rush to her aid. They could only trust the rhythm of nature. For viewers who wonder why rangers don't step in, the truth is that too much interference breaks the very wildness they are sworn to protect. Luna's struggle was her own, and in honoring that, the staff gave her cubs the chance to be born, wild, not managed. Hours dragged. Then close to dawn, the den grew quiet, too quiet. Even through the storm, the rangers noticed. No shuffle, no groan, no scrape. The air seemed empty of sound. Ethan stepped outside the tent snow, coating his jacket, and listened hard. Nothing. He motioned for silence, and together they strained their ears. Still nothing. A silence that deep often means one of two things: the end of labor or the end of life. The quiet stretched so long that doubt set in. Was Luna gone? Had the cub died before it ever breathed? Some of the staff exchanged anxious looks. One muttered, "We should have done more." But Ethan shook his head. He knew this silence was part of the story, not its conclusion. He reminded them, bears teach us that endings and beginnings often sound the same. This fresh perspective silence as a threshold shifted the mood. The younger staff stopped pacing. They waited, hearts heavy but still hopeful. The lesson for them and for us is that not all action is visible. Just because we cannot hear movement does not mean nothing is happening. Life often stirs in the quiet, hidden until the right moment. And so the rangers sat in the snow, waiting for the next sign. They did not know what they would hear, only that whatever came would reveal the truth. Would Luna emerge exhausted and alone, her den silent forever? Or would a tiny sound, a squeak, a whimper, a cry, break the long night and prove that life had won? What came next when the silence finally broke was unlike anything the staff had expected. And it would shock them, not because birth itself is unusual, but because of what that newborn cub managed to do in its very first moments. The silence in Luna's den stretched into eternity. The staff sat rigid breaths, fogging the air, each second heavier than the last. Then it came a thin squeak, sharp but fragile like air escaping a reed. One sound, then another. The staff exhaled together. Life had arrived. A black bear mama had brought her cub into the world. Normally, a cub's cry is faint, almost unremarkable. But what startled the rangers was its strength. It rang clear, louder than they expected for a creature no bigger than a squirrel. One staffer whispered, "That's not just a cub, that's a fighter." The cry continued insistent, as though the newborn demanded to be noticed. For context, black bear cubs are born blind, toothless, and nearly hairless. They weigh less than a pound, smaller than most human preemies. Their survival hinges on two things: finding warmth and finding milk. Usually they cry, softly nudging toward their mother's belly. But Luna's cub announced itself with a voice that seemed to fill the den. It shocked the staff, not because the sound itself was unusual, but because of what that sound signaled: strength, vigor, and determination. The lesson here is that first impressions matter even in the wild. A strong cry can mean a higher chance of survival. Biologists often listen to those first sounds as indicators of vitality. A weak cub may never latch. A vocal one often insists its way into life. Luna's newborn, from the very first breath, declared it had no intention of fading quietly. Then came the twist. Minutes later, another sound, a softer squeal. The rangers froze. Could it be black bear mamas sometimes give birth to two cubs, occasionally three, but seeing it happen in the wild is rare? They leaned forward, straining to hear. Sure enough, two distinct cries emerged, overlapping, one stronger, one weaker. Luna had delivered twins. The shock rippled through the group. Ethan closed his eyes and shook his head. "Unbelievable," he muttered. He knew the odds. Twin births in black bears are possible, but they push the limits of survival. The mother must divide her energy, her warmth, her milk. In the wild, resources are scarce, and a weaker twin often slips away. To explain why, think of elephants. In Kenya, twin elephant births are so rare that entire parks celebrate them. Yet they almost always end in heartbreak because one calf cannot compete. The biology is similar. Large mammals are designed to nurture one, sometimes two, but seldom more. With black bears, twin litters are more common than in elephants, yet the principle holds. Survival is not guaranteed for either. The staff knew this, and their joy was tempered with worry. They remembered stories of Montana mothers losing a cub after long labor. They recalled research showing that in captivity with supplemental feeding, twins thrive, but in the wild, even one sick day can tip the scales. The mystery was not whether Luna had twins. The mystery was whether she could keep both alive through the Wyoming winter. What made this moment remarkable was not just biology, but behavior. When the second cub cried, the first one fell silent for a moment as though listening. Then it wriggled toward the new sibling, tiny paws flailing. Bears at this age cannot see, but they can feel. And already these twins were aware of each other. The staff exchanged glances. They had never seen such immediate recognition, two voices weaving together in the den's darkness. Here lies a fresh perspective. Life begins not in isolation, but in connection. Even in the wild, where survival is brutal, bonds form instantly. Scientists studying black bears often emphasize their solitary nature as adults. But in their earliest hours, cubs are anything but solitary. They lean on each other for warmth, reassurance, and survival. The rangers wrote down notes feverishly. 2 cries, 1 loud one, weak. Possible twins. They dared not get closer, but already they knew this was a rare entry for their records. Wildlife staff across the U.S. gathered data on births, but witnessing a black bear mama giving birth in real time, let alone to twins, is nearly unheard of. Ethan remembered a case from the Smoky Mountains decades earlier where twins had survived into adulthood. Park researchers had followed those cubs for years, documenting their sibling play, their rivalry for food, and eventually their dispersal. That story had become a legend among conservationists, proof that sometimes against the odds, both twins can make it. He whispered to the others, "Maybe we're about to see it again." But there was still danger. The stronger cub's cry grew bolder, but the weaker one faltered, fading into small whimpers. Luna nudged it repeatedly, urging it toward her milk. She could not spare attention for long. The stronger cub clawed its way to her belly, demanding to feed. This is where maternal instinct is tested. Can she balance the needs of both without losing either? The staff wrestled with the urge to help. Some whispered about sedating Luna to check the weaker cub. Ethan silenced them. "Interference means captivity," he said firmly. "If we step in, they're no longer wild. That's not our choice to make." His words carried weight, reminding them of the boundary between compassion and intrusion. Sometimes the hardest love is letting go. We want to save every life, but wild animals are not pets. Their survival stories must unfold without our control, because that is what keeps them wild. The staff's restraint that night was as important as Luna's instincts. Hours passed and the cries became a rhythm, strong, weak, strong, weak. The den echoed with the sound of life trying to stake its claim. To the rangers, each cry was a thread pulling them deeper into the mystery. They could not see the cubs, but their minds painted pictures, tiny forms nestled in fur noses, rooting paws, twitching voices calling out into the dark. The fresh perspective here is that sound is survival. In the human world, we look for sight as proof of life. In the bear's world, it is voice. Those squeaks told the rangers everything they needed to know. The cubs were alive, struggling, but still fighting. And that knowledge carried them through the long wait. When dawn came, the forest around Shoshone glowed pink with sunrise. The storm had passed, leaving drifts of snow like carved waves. The den remained quiet again, but this time the silence did not feel empty. The rangers knew there was life inside, tucked against Luna's belly, hidden but real. Ethan closed his notebook and said softly, "That first cry changed everything. It had shifted them from despair to hope, from doubt to belief." The staff packed their gear, leaving the den undisturbed. They would return later, but for now Luna and her cubs deserved peace. As they hiked down the ridge, one thought lingered. What kind of future awaited those cubs? Would they both survive, or would the odds prove too steep? The staff had witnessed something extraordinary, but the real test was just beginning. Because as powerful as that first cry was survival. In the wilderness is not measured in minutes, it is measured in seasons. And survival would demand more than sound. It would require resilience, instinct, and perhaps even a miracle. The next challenge came quickly, and it was written in the weakest cub's struggle to rise. What happened in those first attempts to stand would once again shock everyone watching. When the staff confirmed Luna had twins, their relief was tempered with unease. For most animals, the first cry marks a beginning, but for a black bear mama, it also signals an immense burden. Unlike elephants or wolves, bears raise their young without the cushion of a herd or a pack. Luna would have no sisters to calm her cubs, no aunts to defend them, no circle of bodies to share warmth. She alone had to be mother, teacher, and protector. To understand why this mattered, consider the difference in how large mammals raise their young. Elephants, for instance, live in herds led by matriarchs. When one female gives birth, the others form a protective wall, trumpeting warnings and offering trunks of comfort. Calves grow up surrounded by allamothers, older siblings, or cousins who babysit and guide. Even in crisis, no elephant mother is ever truly alone. Black bears are different. They live solitary lives, meeting only briefly to mate or when food sources overlap. A den is not a nursery with multiple caretakers. It is a dark, silent hollow holding one mother and her cubs. Everything warmth, nourishment, defense depends on her. If she falters, her cubs perish. That difference is stark, and it was not lost on the staff who watched from the Wyoming ridge. Ethan explained it to the younger rangers as they scribbled notes. With elephants, survival is shared. With black bears, survival is carried on one back. His words framed the challenge Luna faced. For one cub, her milk might be enough. For two, every ounce of fat she stored through autumn would be stretched thin. Every nap would be shorter, every movement heavier. Still, there is beauty in that solitude. A black bear mother's bond with her cubs is profound precisely because it is undivided. She does not delegate or divide attention. She responds to every cry, nudges, every attempt to crawl, warms, every shiver. Her den is a place of intimacy. To picture Luna curled around her newborns is to see the raw essence of motherhood, one body, two fragile lives bound together in a fight against winter. The rangers debated quietly about the twins' odds. Statistics say black bear twins often fare better than elephant twins, but mortality rates still climb when food is scarce. Some remembered stories of orphan cubs found weak after harsh winters. Others cited successes, mothers who raised two cubs to weaning their survival, celebrated as small victories in conservation. There is a lesson here. Strength is not always found in numbers. Herds provide safety in a community, but solitude creates resilience of a different kind. Luna's motherhood would be defined not by shared labor, but by endurance. She could not call on allies, but she could call on her instincts, honed by generations of bears. And the cubs themselves were part of the story. The stronger one wriggled constantly, its cries demanding and insistent. The weaker one whimpered softly, its movements hesitant. Yet even in their vulnerability, they leaned against each other, tiny bodies pressing together for warmth. That bond, though simple, carried weight. Alone, each cub was fragile. Together, they created heat, comfort, and a sense of belonging. The fresh perspective here is that family is not defined by numbers, but by presence. Elephants show it through collective care, wolves through pack loyalty, and bears through the solitary devotion of one mother. Each system is valid, each tailored to survival in different landscapes. Luna's way may seem lonely, but it is no less powerful. Ethan recalled an example from years ago when a black bear in Minnesota was observed raising twins near a human settlement. Locals often saw her crossing yards with two cubs trailing behind, both surviving into adulthood, despite cars, hunters, and harsh winters. She did it without a herd, without a pack, Ethan said. Just a mother and her cubs against the odds. He shared this with the younger staff to remind them solitude does not equal weakness. For the audience, the takeaway is clear. Different species teach different lessons of care. Where one shows the value of community, another shows the value of individual strength. In Luna's case, her cubs would not have aunts to guide them or siblings to distract predators. They had only her. But sometimes one steady protector is enough. The staff continued to monitor the den from afar, noting changes in the cries. They realized Luna was already navigating the delicate balance of feeding both cubs. The stronger one latched quickly, gulping greedily. The weaker hesitated, fumbling for warmth. Luna alternated her body, shifting slightly so each had access. These subtle adjustments, invisible to most, revealed the precision of her instincts. She was not guessing. She was measuring, responding, ensuring neither cub was forgotten. This is where mystery lingers. How does a mother who has never raised twins before know how to divide herself? Science explains it partly as instinct, partly as feedback to the cub's cries. But there is also something beyond data. A quiet intelligence passed through bloodlines, an unspoken knowledge that mothers across species seem to share. The rangers watching through the cold night felt both awe and humility. They knew they could never match that level of attentiveness. For all their tools and training, they were clumsy compared to a black bear mama curled in the dark with her twins. And so the story of Luna's family unfolded not in grand gestures, but in quiet persistence. She had no herd to shield her, no pack to hunt for her. She had only herself and the two cries she answered. Yet in that solitude there was strength. The night ended with the cubs nestled close, their tiny voices fading into sleep. The staff retreated from the ridge, their hearts heavy but hopeful. They knew this was just the beginning. The real trial was still to come, the struggle of the weaker cub to rise to prove it could stand alongside its sibling. That moment would not just test Luna, it would test the fragile balance between life and loss in the wilderness. Inside Luna's den, two lives had entered the world together, but almost immediately, their paths began to diverge. The first cub squirmed with energy, its cries loud, its movements insistent. The second was slower, quieter, its tiny body trembling, as if every motion demanded more than it had to give. For the staff listening from outside, the difference was clear. This was not a level playing field. Among black bears, unequal strength at birth is not uncommon. Twins may emerge minutes apart, yet one carries the advantage: better weight, quicker reflexes, stronger lungs. That first edge can set the tone for survival. In Luna's case, the gap between her cubs was wide. One seemed born ready to fight, the other still searching for the will to try. The stronger cub latched onto its mother, quickly paws, kneading mouth, pulling in desperate gulps of milk. Each cry was followed by satisfied silence. The weaker cub, meanwhile, flailed aimlessly, nose brushing against fur but failing to find its mark. Hours passed, and the staff could hear the rhythm. One cub feeding, one cub fumbling. The imbalance grew sharper with every cycle. Ethan whispered to the others, "If it doesn't nurse soon, it may not survive the night." His voice carried the weight of experience. He had seen this before. Healthy cubs thriving beside siblings who faded quietly, their cries growing softer until they ceased altogether. In the wild, survival is often decided in those first fragile hours. An example came to his mind years earlier in Montana. A black bear mother gave birth to triplets. Two nursed quickly, strongly, and coordinated. The third lagged weaker from the start. By spring, only the first two emerged from the den. The mother had done all she could, but her milk, her warmth, her protection, it had limits. That story haunted Ethan as he listened to Luna's den. The lesson here is harsh but essential. Not every beginning guarantees a future. In nature, survival does not come from fairness. It comes from resilience. And yet, resilience is not always measured in size or strength. Sometimes it is measured in persistence, in the refusal to give up, even when the odds lean heavily against you. Luna seemed to sense the imbalance. She nudged the weaker cub repeatedly, shifting her body so it could reach her belly. At times, she even pulled it close with her paw, as though refusing to let it drift too far. Bears are often thought of as fierce and solitary, yet in these moments a black bear mama reveals tenderness that rivals any herd animal. She had no allies, but she would not abandon her effort. Still, effort alone could not erase the difference. The stronger cub grew louder, fuller, more active. The weaker one whimpered softly, exhausted by the simple act of trying to crawl. Its squeaks came in bursts, followed by long silences that left the staff holding their breath. Each pause carried the question, was this the last sound it would make? What gave the staff pause was the way Luna responded. Every time the weaker cub faltered, she shifted, nudged, and encouraged. Unlike elephants, where older siblings might intervene, Luna bore this task alone. Yet she seemed to know that her attention mattered most to the one who struggled. The fresh perspective here is that motherhood adapts to need. Where one cub demanded less, the other demanded more, and Luna responded in kind. The staff wrestled with their own instincts. Some argued for intervention. We could sedate her, get the cub nursing, one suggested. But Ethan shook his head. The line between help and harm is thin, he said. Once you cross it, they're no longer wild. His words echoed lessons from conservation. Protecting wild animals often means letting them face their struggles without interference. To step in is to change the story, sometimes in ways that do more harm than good. As the night stretched on, the weaker cub's struggle continued. It attempted to crawl again and again, paused, trembling, head lifting only to fall back onto the nest of fur and leaves. Each attempt seemed smaller than the last, but each attempt came nonetheless. Persistence became its only language. To the staff, those faint movements carried hope. Ethan leaned forward, voice low. Sometimes the ones who fight hardest at the start become the strongest later. He told of a study in Minnesota where a weak cub had lagged behind its sibling through winter, yet by its second year it had grown larger and more independent than the one who seemed stronger at birth. The researchers called it the paradox of survival, how the smallest can surprise you if given just enough chance. That story reframed the moment for the younger rangers. Instead of seeing weakness as failure, they began to see it as a different kind of test. The lesson for them and for us is clear strength comes in many forms, and sometimes the quietest struggles hide the greatest resilience. The hours dragged and the staff drifted between hope and despair. Each faint cry from the weaker cub lifted their spirits. Each silence sank them again. They were learning the emotional rhythm of wildlife observation, the tension of caring deeply while knowing you cannot control the outcome. It is a rhythm familiar to every conservationist, every ranger, every wildlife vet who has stood at the line between human compassion and natural law. And then, near dawn, a shift. The weaker cub, after hours of fumbling, finally found Luna's belly. It latched clumsily, pausing often, but it nursed. The sound was faint but unmistakable, the rhythm of swallowing. The staff exhaled in unison. For now, at least, life had claimed another foothold. Still, the cub's victory was fragile. Nursing once did not guarantee survival. Its body remained weaker, its cries softer. The stronger sibling still outpaced it at every turn, but the attempt mattered. It proved the cub was not giving up. It proved Luna's devotion was not wasted. The fresh perspective here is this struggle itself is a sign of life. In the wild, giving up is the true enemy. As long as the weaker cub tried, as long as Luna responded, there was hope. That night, the den became more than a hollow in Wyoming's forest. It became a classroom teaching everyone nearby about resilience, patience, and the fine line between despair and survival. The staff hiked back to camp, tired but quiet. They carried with them the sound of faint sucking, the image of a tiny cub refusing to yield. They knew the battle was not over. Every day ahead would demand more from Luna and from the cubs. But for now, the story had turned a corner. The weak one had shown a spark, and sparks have a way of growing. As the rangers settled into camp, Ethan wrote in his notebook, 2 cubs alive. 1 strong one still struggling. Tomorrow will tell us if hope is enough. His words captured the fragile truth. Survival was not yet secure, but it was still possible. And what came next when the cub pushed beyond its first attempts and tried to rise on shaky legs would once again defy expectations. Because sometimes the greatest shock is not in birth itself, but in the first steps that follow. The weaker cub had nursed, but barely. Its small body trembled with each attempt, its cries fading quickly into silence. For hours, Luna kept nudging it, shifting her position, refusing to give up. The staff outside the den whispered to one another, wondering if this was the end. And then, against all expectations, the cub stirred. At first, it was only a twitch, one paw stretching forward, then the other. Slowly, with effort, the cub tried to lift its chest from the ground. It wobbled, sank, and tried again. This was unusual. Black bear cubs, born blind and helpless, rarely attempt such movement in their first days. Most remain pressed against their mother, content to nurse and sleep. But this cub fought to rise as if determined to prove something. Ethan leaned closer, straining to hear through the muffled snow. He had monitored many bear births in his career, but never had he recorded a newborn pushing so hard so soon. "It's trying to stand," he murmured, shaking his head in disbelief. To the younger rangers, the moment felt surreal. A creature weighing less than a pound was testing its strength like a stubborn toddler, refusing to crawl before walking. Why was this so shocking? Because in black bear biology, development is slow and deliberate. Cubs are not expected to walk for weeks. Their first days are meant for feeding, sleeping, and conserving energy. Attempting to rise this early wastes precious calories and risks exhaustion. Yet here was Luna's weakest cub, trembling on its tiny limbs, bracing against the nest of fur and leaves forcing its body upright. The stronger cub paused in its nursing, squeaked and pressed against its sibling as if lending support. For a brief second, both stood together, one steady, one swaying. The staff could hear the rustle of movement, the muffled squeals of effort. Then the weaker cub toppled sideways, landing with a soft thud. But instead of lying still, it squeaked loudly, almost defiantly, and tried again. The lesson here is that resilience does not always look graceful. Sometimes it looks clumsy, messy, and full of failed attempts. Yet each failure is also progress. The cub's repeated falls were not signs of weakness, but of determination. By trying, it declared itself alive in the only way it could. Ethan shared a memory with the others, a case from Minnesota where researchers observed a weak cub lagging far behind its sibling in winter. At first, it seemed doomed, but that cub kept moving, even if slower, even if clumsier. By spring, it had grown strong enough to forage on its own, and by the second year, it was the larger of the two. "I see that same spirit here," Ethan said quietly. "The fresh perspective is that strength can be borrowed from the future." The cub did not yet have the body to match its will, but its will hinted at the body it might someday grow into. In those trembling steps was the promise of survival, the hint that this small life had more to give than its frailty suggested. For Luna, the turnaround was clear. She leaned forward, wrapping her muzzle gently around the cub, lifting it slightly and steadying it against her fur. To outside eyes, it might look like simple nudging, but the rangers knew better. She was helping her newborn stand. This is rare behavior for black bears. Mothers usually keep cubs nestled, not upright. Yet Luna seemed to sense what her cub needed, not coddling, but support. The staff fell silent, realizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. They had expected a loss. Instead, they were seeing cooperation between mother and cub in a way few had documented. Luna's actions blurred the line between instinct and intentional care. She wasn't just feeding, she was teaching, encouraging, almost coaching her fragile cub toward resilience. One ranger whispered, "It's like watching a miracle in slow motion." And, in a sense, it was. The unthinkable had happened. The weakest cub, the one most likely to fade quietly, had found a way to shock everyone. It had stood unsteady, yes, but long enough to prove it was alive in more than just breath. The takeaway for us is that support changes the story. Alone, the cub might have failed. With Luna's steady nudges, it found its footing. That principle echoes beyond bears in human lives, too. Resilience often requires encouragement. Sometimes the smallest push, the quietest support, transforms weakness into strength. The staff recorded every detail. They knew these notes might someday help explain survival rates in twin black bear litters or shed light on maternal behaviors not often observed. But beyond data, what they carried was emotion. They had expected despair. Instead, they felt hope swelling in the frozen Wyoming night. The cub's turnaround reframed the story. No longer was it a tale of imbalance, one strong, one weak. Now it was a tale of persistence. Both cubs had declared their will to live, and Luna had responded with all she had. The rangers realized they were not just observers of a rare event. They were witnesses to resilience written in fur and sound. As dawn broke, the cries from the den softened into steady rhythms. The twins nestled against their mother, fed, warmed, and quiet at last. The forest exhaled with them. For the staff, the night's tension lifted, replaced by awe. They had entered the evening fearing loss, but they left it with the image of a cub standing where none should have stood. The fresh perspective for the audience is this: miracles are not always grand. Sometimes they are measured in inches. A single step, a single cry, a single refusal to quit. These are the unthinkable turnarounds that change not just an animal's future, but the way humans understand survival. Back at camp, Ethan wrote in his notebook, "The weakest one stood. Luna helped. Hope renewed." His words were simple, but they captured a truth that would echo far beyond the night. Yet hope brings new challenges. Word of the twins, if it spread beyond the park staff, could draw attention from more than conservationists. Social media tourists, even those who hunt for profit. Such news never stays quiet for long. The next shock would not come from the cubs' struggle inside the den, but from the world outside it eager to see, to share, to claim. For days after the cubs' unthinkable turnaround, the staff at Shoshone kept quiet. They logged notes, checked the ridge from afar, and kept Luna's den a secret, even from curious hikers. 2 cubs in the wild, one strong and one fragile, were a gift too rare to risk. But secrets in the wilderness rarely last. It started with a photograph. One ranger, overwhelmed by the moment, snapped a blurry image from a distance, 2 tiny cubs pressed against their black bear mama in the snow-filtered light of dawn. He shared it with a friend who shared it with another. Within days, the photo reached social media. What was meant as quiet documentation became a spark that spread faster than fire through dry pines. The reaction was immediate. Thousands of comments poured in. People marveled at the sight of twins, called it a miracle, and begged to know more. 2 cubs born in the Wyoming wild, can you believe it? One caption read. For most, it was a simple joy, a glimpse into the hidden world of wild animals. But for the rangers, joy carried weight. Why? Because attention changes everything. In conservation, visibility is double-edged. On one hand, public interest brings support. Donations flow to wildlife funds. Volunteers sign up and awareness spreads. On the other hand, visibility invites risk. Crowds of tourists want to see what they saw online. Hunters and poachers learn about vulnerable animals. The very lives celebrated can become targets. The staff debated what to do. Ethan warned them. We can't control the internet. We can only control what we tell people. He remembered a case in Montana where a photo of orphan bear cubs went viral. Visitors swarmed the area, desperate for a glimpse, and their presence forced the cubs to move, disrupting their feeding and nearly costing them their survival. That memory haunted him now. The lesson is clear. Curiosity must be balanced with responsibility. It is natural to feel awe at wildlife stories, but awe alone is not enough. Without careful boundaries, our desires to witness can harm the very creatures we claim to love. The cubs, of course, knew nothing of this. They pressed against Luna, squeaked for milk, slept in her warmth. Their world was simple: survive one day, then the next. But beyond the ridge, humans were talking. News outlets picked up the story of a black bear mama with twins in Wyoming. Some headlines called it a once-in-a-lifetime event. Others framed it as proof of nature's resilience. The fresh perspective here is that wildlife stories do not belong to humans alone. They begin in dens, rivers, and forests long before we arrive. When we share them, we must remember we are guests in those stories, not authors. Luna's cubs were not born for social media. They were born for the forest. Still, the staff couldn't ignore the momentum. Awareness has value. Public attention can fund patrols, support sanctuaries, and inspire new conservationists. Ethan reminded the younger rangers. Every child who sees these cubs online and chooses to protect wildlife instead of harming it, that's a victory. He believed in the ripple effect of inspiration even as he feared the risks. An example reinforced his point. In Alaska, a viral video once showed a polar bear struggling on melting ice. The heartbreak of that image raised millions for climate research and pushed conversations about conservation into mainstream homes. Painful as it was, the attention led to action. Perhaps Ethan thought Luna's cubs could inspire similar change, not through despair, but through hope. The staff decided to walk a careful line. They confirmed the cubs' birth, but withheld the exact location of the den. They released a statement reminding people that wild animals are not attractions. They urged visitors to respect distance, to support conservation efforts instead of crowding the forest. Their message was simple: celebrate from afar. Yet they also prepared for danger. Social media attention can attract poachers even in protected lands. The park increased patrols, doubling the number of scouts on shifts near Shoshone's ridges. They worked with local communities, explaining why secrecy mattered, why vigilance was needed. Every footprint near Luna's den was noted, every unusual sound investigated. Protecting the cubs became not just a duty, but a daily mission. This reveals another lesson. Conservation is not only science, it is community. Rangers, locals, scientists, and even distant supporters all play a role. Protecting one black bear mama in Wyoming required more than biology. It required cooperation, trust, and vigilance from many hands. The cubs, meanwhile, continued to grow. The stronger one nursed greedily, the weaker one pushed itself to rise again and again. Their cries blended into a harmony that filled the den with sound. To the rangers, each squeak was reassurance that life still pulsed there. And in their hearts, they knew the world outside would not stop listening. Sharing a story is a responsibility, not just a privilege. Every time we post, comment, or spread an image of wildlife, we shape its outcome. We can fuel exploitation, or we can fuel protection. The choice rests in how we act once we know. Back at camp, Ethan closed his notebook and sighed. "The world knows now," he said quietly. "The question is whether the world will help or harm." His words lingered in the cold air, reminding everyone that awareness is not the end of a story, it is the beginning of a test. The rangers braced for what came next. More visitors. More questions. More eyes on the den. They hoped people would choose wisely. They hoped the attention would strengthen Luna's chance to raise both cubs, not weaken it. And so the mystery deepened. The cubs had survived birth. They had survived the first attempts to stand, and now they faced a new challenge, not from hunger or cold, but from human curiosity. The next chapter would decide whether this attention became a shield of support or a shadow of danger. Spring in Wyoming comes quietly. Snow softens, rivers break free, and the forest stirs with sound. On the ridge where Luna denned, rangers waited anxious to see who would emerge. When at last the black bear mama appeared, her two cubs pressed against her legs. The staff released a cheer they had been holding for months. Both had survived the long winter. Both had proved the odds wrong. For the staff, it was more than science, it was emotion. They had walked through nights of silence, through hours of doubt, through moments when the weaker cub seemed destined to fade. And yet here the little one stood wobbly but alive, squinting against sunlight it had never seen. It was a victory that belonged not just to Luna, but to resilience itself. Why did this matter so much? Because twin survival in wild black bears is rare. Most mothers can barely sustain one cub, let alone two. The biology is stacked against them, limited fat reserves, harsh winters, predators waiting for weakness. Yet Luna, alone and unaided, carried both cubs into the light of spring. She showed that strength is not measured by size or numbers, but by steady devotion. An example came to mind for Ethan as he watched them emerge. Years ago in Minnesota, researchers documented twin cubs raised in captivity, thriving under human care. Their survival was celebrated, but some wondered if it was fair to compare. Captivity provides constant food, shelter, and protection. The wild offers none of that. Luna's triumph carried more weight because it happened without fences, without hands, without intervention. It was wilderness at its purest, survival earned step by step. The lesson for us is profound hope often hides in places we least expect. A weak cub written off by biology can rise. A solitary mother without a herd or a pack can protect two lives. And a story that began in whispers of despair can end in cries of triumph. The knowledge the staff carried forward went beyond field notes. They saw firsthand how maternal behavior adapts when tested. They recorded how twins leaned on each other for warmth, how a mother altered her body to feed the weaker one, how persistence in the smallest cub became its saving grace. These details matter for science, but they also matter for the soul. They remind us that resilience is written into life itself, waiting to surprise us. The emotions tied to this story ripple outward. For some, it sparks joy, the sight of wild animals persevering in a harsh world. For others, it awakens responsibility. The reminder that our choices, sharing photos, protecting habitats, supporting conservation, carry weight. For all, it is a moment of connection. Watching Luna and her cubs is not just observing wildlife. It is recognizing ourselves in their struggle and survival. Here is the fresh perspective: nature's victories are mirrors of our own lives. The cubs' fragile attempts to rise echo our own stumbles when facing challenges. Luna's unwavering care reflects the devotion we show to those we love. The staff's restraint, choosing not to interfere, reminds us that sometimes support means stepping back. These lessons are not locked in the forest. They belong to anyone willing to see. Think of the world beyond Luna's den. Across Wyoming, black bears face shrinking habitats as development spreads. Across North America, wild animals contend with climate shifts, dwindling food sources, and rising encounters with humans. Luna's survival story is rare not only because of biology, but because the conditions that allow it are disappearing. Her triumph is a reminder of what is still possible if we choose to protect. And so the story of a black bear mama and her twins becomes bigger than one family. It becomes a call to see the wilderness not as scenery, but as a sanctuary. To treat forest animals not as curiosities, but as neighbors. To remember that every cub, every howl, every rustle of wild wings or paws carries value. Ethan closed his final notebook entry with simple words. Both survived. Luna strong. Cubs strong. Hope strong. Those words can be ours too, if we choose. We can carry Luna's lesson into our own lives, into our own choices. So now take a moment to reflect. Where in your life have you seen resilience, your own or someone else's? Where have you witnessed a struggle that seemed unwinnable only to find strength where none was expected? Let Luna's cub remind you. Miracles are often small, quiet and fragile, but they are no less real. And if this story touched you, if you felt even for a moment the warmth of connection between wild animals and ourselves, then carry it forward. Share that feeling. Support conservation where you can. And here right now, take one simple step like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join a community that believes in stories like Luna's, stories of survival, connection, and the mystery that still breathes in the wild. Because every time you choose to listen, to care, to act, you help ensure that the next generation of cubs, wolves, or forest animals has a chance to stand, just as Luna's did.